Hi, welcome to the 700 Club. We're so glad you're with us. The United States is closing in on a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. Now the U.S. and the European Union are awaiting Iran's response, while Israel stands in very strong opposition to the agreement.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister has denounced it as a bad deal that will give Iran over $100 billion a year to spread terror around the globe. Chris Mitchell brings us the latest.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid is still urging the U.S. and other nations to stay away from what he calls a bad deal.
It would give Iran $100 billion a year. This money will not build schools or hospitals. This is $100 billion a year that will be used to undermine stability in the Middle East and spread terror around the globe.
His remarks to foreign journalists came as both sides reported progress in the talks.
In our eyes, it does not meet the standards set by President Biden himself, preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear state.
Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, calls it a shameful moment.
When President Biden was elected, he said clearly that he will make sure that the new agreement will be stronger and longer. What we are seeing today is a weaker and shorter agreement that will actually allow Iran to continue with their nuclear ambitions. It will be dangerous for Israel and for the region.
The U.S. and other world powers first signed a nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. 3 years later, then President Trump withdrew. Since then, Iran has openly broken the terms. 16 months ago, the EU began trying to revive the agreement.
They want to sign the agreement and to say we finished with that. But that's not the case. That's why together with our allies in the region, we will have to stand strong against Iran and prepare ourselves for every option.
Reserve Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser says Russia, China, and Iran would benefit from such an agreement.
From a global point of view, this is a very dangerous development because it means that all the three main powers that want to change the global order are making progress in their efforts because they understand that there is an American weakness.
Danon feels a deal would put Israel in a challenging position and believes the U.S. is taking advantage of Israel's political situation. With upcoming elections and what Danon calls an inexperienced leader, he believes the next government would need to do three things.
First is to isolate Iran. Second is to call for more sanctions. And third is to build our military capability. So if we will have to take care of this threat ourselves, we will have the means to do it.
Despite the nation's political differences, Danon maintains that when it comes to Iran, Israel will be united. Andrew?
Chris, appreciate you being with us. Talk about the concerns about the sanctions relief and the reported billions Iran would receive after this deal.
Well, Andrew, it's not only $100 billion now, but there's estimated by 2030 there'd be $1 trillion given to Iran. Now, the main concern people have is what this is going to do is fuel the many Iranian proxies throughout the region. That includes Hezbollah in Lebanon. That includes the Houthis in Hezbollah in Lebanon, I should say, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and also Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank. And even now, Andrew, right now, some of these proxies are preparing to actually accelerate their attempts to destroy the Jewish state, which is the stated goal of not only Iran, but many of these proxies throughout the region.
All right, Chris, how about the Abraham Accords? They're nearly 2 years old. Talk about the impact a revived nuclear deal has on them.
Well, it's going to have a big impact. Right now, Andrew, what we're seeing is many of these Sunni nations like the UAE, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, that had been, not Saudi Arabia being part of the Abraham Accords, but many of these other nations are turning away from Israel and turning towards Iran. We were in the Gulf states and met with many leaders just a couple of months ago, and they were saying that Iran is the #1 threat. In fact, one leader said the three main threats that they face were Iran, Iran, and Iran. They're only 100 miles across the Gulf, and they see that as maybe the first step that Iran would attack. We were there in 2019 when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia, and also the Houthis have been attacking the UAE right now. So it really puts the pressure on these nations to hedge their bets and go towards Iran and away from Israel and the Abraham Accords. It really threatens these historic agreements.
So regarding Israel, does it put more pressure on Israel to attack Iran?
Very much so. And they have said that they're not party to this agreement. They have said that they will do whatever it takes to defend the Jewish state. And there's one thing that I think people need to understand, Andrew, and it's called the Begin Doctrine. Former Prime Minister Menachem Begin said they will not allow Iran or any of the neighbors of Israel to get a weapon of mass destruction. And I think he did that in 1981 when he attacked the Iraqi nuclear reactor. Ehud Olmert did that in 2007. We'll see what Israel will do in 2022 or 2023 to prevent any neighbor like Iran getting a nuclear program, nuclear weapon, or a weapon of mass destruction. And it really behooves people to be praying right now for the peace of Jerusalem.
Yeah, Chris, real quick, I know you can't speak for the administration, but how does this deal possibly benefit the United States?
Well, you know, Andrew, what I think it does is there are two main ways to deal with enemies. So the Biden administration is appeasing Iran. The Trump administration confronted Iran with its maximum pressure campaign. And, you know, Winston Churchill said an appeaser is someone that feeds a crocodile hoping they will eat them last. I think right now we're seeing appeasement in action with potentially disastrous consequences.
All right, two very different approaches. Chris, thank you so much for being with us.